For decades, Maury Povich stood at the center of family truth and DNA revelations. Calm voice, one envelope, and a sentence that could change lives forever. But some stories never made it to that famous stage. Some truths were too heavy, even for the brightest studio lights. This is one of those stories. The envelope had been sitting on the kitchen table for 3 days. Nobody touched it. Nobody moved it. It just sat there, white and clinical, with the laboratory's logo pressed into the corner like a scar. And every time someone walked past, their eyes found it, their breath caught, and they kept walking. Laura Whitfield was 42 years old. She had raised her daughter, Emily, alone for 19 years. She had worked double shifts at the hospital, missed holidays, skipped her own birthdays, just to make sure Emily had everything she needed. And for 19 years, one question had lived in the back of her mind like a splinter she couldn't reach. Who was Emily's father? She thought she knew. She had convinced herself she knew. But the truth was far more complicated than a single name. But before we open that envelope, you need to understand how it got there. It started in the summer of 2004. Laura was 23, freshly graduated from nursing school, working her first job at St. Michael's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. She was young, she was hopeful, and she was in love. Or at least, she thought she was. His name was Andrew. Andrew Miller. He was a resident physician, 5 years older, with a smile that made the fluorescent lights feel warmer. They met in the break room during a night shift. He offered her coffee. She offered him a tired laugh. And within weeks, they were inseparable. But Andrew had a secret. He was engaged. Laura didn't find out until 3 months into their relationship when she saw the ring on another woman's finger at a hospital fundraiser. The woman's name was Natalie. She was beautiful, and she had no idea that her fiancé had been sleeping with the new nurse on the 3rd floor. Laura ended things that night. She cried in her car for an hour, drove home, and swore she would never speak to Andrew Miller again. But 2 weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant, and this is where the first secret was born. Laura never told Andrew about the pregnancy. The thought of being the other woman who trapped a married man with a baby made her physically ill. So she made a decision, one that would haunt her for the next 2 decades. She told her family the father was someone else, a man named Victor. Victor Hayes was a friend from college. They had dated briefly, nothing serious, but he was kind. And when Laura called him, desperate and crying, he agreed to help. "Just tell people it's mine," he said. "I'll sign whatever you need. I'll disappear after that." Victor was a good man, maybe too good. He signed the birth certificate. He showed up at the hospital when Emily was born. He held her once, kissed Laura on the forehead, and then quietly stepped out of their lives, just as he promised. For 19 years, Laura told Emily that her father was a man who had moved to California and lost touch. It was a clean lie. A simple lie. But lies have a way of bleeding through the cracks. And that's exactly what happened last spring. Emily had always been curious. As a child, she asked about her father constantly. Laura gave vague answers. She said he was tall. She said he had kind eyes. But as Emily grew older, the questions became sharper. Why doesn't he ever call? Why aren't there any pictures? Laura deflected. She buried the truth deeper until it felt like it had never existed. But then Emily turned 19. And she bought a DNA testing kit. This is where everything began to unravel. Emily didn't tell her mother about the test. She ordered it online, swabbed her cheek, and mailed it back without saying a word. She just wanted to know her ancestry, maybe a few distant cousins. What she found was something else entirely. 6 weeks later, the results arrived. Emily opened the app, scrolled through the ethnicity estimates, and clicked on the DNA Relatives tab. There, at the top of the list, was a name she didn't recognize. Andrew Miller Jr. shared DNA, 24.8% relationship, half-sibling. Emily stared at the screen. Half-sibling. She didn't have a half-sibling. Her father, Victor, had no other kids. But the DNA didn't lie. Somewhere out there, she had a brother. She didn't confront her mother that night, but the silence between them grew louder. For 2 weeks, Emily researched. She found Andrew Miller Jr.'s social media profile. He was 21, a junior at Ohio State. His father's name was listed clearly, Dr. Andrew Miller. Emily looked up the name, a cardiologist at St. Michael's Hospital, married for 22 years, 2 children. Emily's hands were shaking. She clicked through the photos. Andrew Miller standing with his wife at a charity gala. Andrew Miller coaching his son's little league team. A man who had never carried a single secret, but he had. And Emily was living proof. That's when Emily decided to send the message. She messaged his son through the DNA app. "Hi, my name is Emily. I think we might be related. I'm not looking to cause problems. I just want to understand," Andrew Jr. replied within an hour. "I saw the match too. Can we meet?" And that meeting changed everything. They met at a coffee shop in downtown Columbus on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Andrew Jr. was nervous. His leg bounced under the table. His coffee sat untouched. Emily was terrified. She had rehearsed what she would say 100 times on the drive over, but now every word had evaporated. But the moment they saw each other, something clicked. They had the same nose, the same way of tilting their head when they were thinking, the same nervous laugh that escaped when silence became too heavy. They talked for 3 hours. Andrew Jr. told Emily about his family, his father, the cardiologist, his mother, Natalie, who taught high school English, his little sister, Sophie, who was starting college next fall. He said his parents had always seemed happy, solid, the kind of couple that other couples envied. Emily told him about growing up without a father, about the man named Victor who had signed her birth certificate and disappeared, about her mother who had worked herself to exhaustion just to make sure Emily never felt the absence too deeply. By the end of the conversation, they both knew the truth. Their father had an affair 20 years ago, and Emily was the result. But there was one problem. Andrew Jr. wanted answers. He wanted to understand how his father, the man who had coached his little league team, who had taught him to drive, who had given a speech at his high school graduation, could have kept this secret for 2 decades. And he wasn't willing to keep this secret any longer. 2 days later, Andrew Miller Sr. received a phone call from his son. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. "Dad, did you have an affair with a woman named Laura Whitfield in 2004? There was a long pause. And then Andrew said 3 words that confirmed everything. "How did you find out?" But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Andrew didn't deny the affair, but when his son asked, "Is Emily your daughter?" Andrew hesitated. "I don't know," he said. "What do you mean?" "Laura and I weren't the only ones." That's when the second name entered the story. Andrew explained that during the summer of 2004, Laura had been involved with someone else, another resident at the hospital, a man named Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan and Andrew had been friends back then. They had worked the same grueling shifts together, shared the same patients, complained about the same attending physicians over beer at the bar down the street. They had trusted each other, and apparently they had also loved the same woman. A mutual friend mentioned it casually. Something about Laura and Jonathan being seen together at a restaurant. Andrew had felt sick, betrayed, even though he had been the one who was engaged, even though he had been the one living a double life. By then, Natalie had already found out about the affair. Someone from the hospital had let it slip at a dinner party. Andrew had confessed everything, or at least everything he thought was true. And he had spent the next 2 decades trying to rebuild his marriage, trying to be the husband Natalie deserved. He never mentioned Jonathan. He never mentioned the possibility that Laura had been with both of them, because admitting that would mean admitting he didn't know if the child was his. And some questions were easier to bury than to answer. But now, 20 years later, the past was clawing its way back to the surface. And Andrew wasn't sure if Emily was his daughter or Jonathan's. Emily confronted her mother that same night. Laura was sitting at the kitchen table when Emily walked through the front door. The house was quiet. A single lamp cast shadows across the room. Laura looked up. She saw the look on her daughter's face, the mixture of anger and confusion and grief. And she knew. "You found out," Laura whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "Who is my father, Mom?" Emily's voice was steady, cold. "And don't say Victor. I know that's a lie. I've always known something was wrong with that story. I just didn't want to believe my own mother would lie to me for 19 years. Laura opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I found a half-brother," Emily continued. "His name is Andrew Miller Jr. His father works at St. Michael's Hospital, the same hospital where you worked when you got pregnant." Laura's hands were trembling. "Tell me the truth. All of it." The silence stretched for what felt like hours. The clock ticked, and finally, Laura did something she should have done 19 years ago. She told her daughter the truth. She had been involved with both men, Andrew and Jonathan, at the same time. Laura hadn't planned it, but she was young, confused, and heartbroken after discovering Andrew's engagement. Jonathan had been there. He had listened. And one night, comfort turned into something else. When Laura found out she was pregnant, she didn't know whose baby she was carrying. So she created a phantom father named Victor. For 19 years, it worked. But now, the lie was over. And that's how the envelope ended up on the table. Laura agreed to take 2 paternity tests. One for Andrew, one for Jonathan. Jonathan Pierce, now a surgeon in Chicago, agreed without hesitation. If she's mine, he said, I want to know. Andrew agreed too, though reluctantly. His wife had found out. Their marriage was already fracturing. 3 weeks later, the results arrived. The envelope sat on the table for 3 days because Laura was afraid to open it. She had spent 2 decades avoiding this moment, convincing herself that love was more important than biology. But now the truth was inches away, and Laura couldn't move. It was Emily who finally picked up the envelope. She didn't ask for permission. She simply grabbed it and tore it open. Laura held her breath. Emily unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the results. And then she looked up with an expression Laura had never seen before. It's positive, Emily said. Which one? Emily set the paper down. Both. The test came back positive, but the real father was still a mystery. The laboratory had made an error. Contamination. Both tests showed a potential match. Neither could be confirmed. A second round of testing would be required. But the damage was already done. Andrew's marriage collapsed within the month. Natalie filed for divorce. Andrew Jr. stopped speaking to his father. Jonathan flew to Columbus to meet Emily. They sat together in a quiet restaurant, and he told her stories about her mother. Even if the test says I'm not your father, he said, I'd like to be part of your life. Emily realized something. Biology wasn't the point. It had never been the point. The second round of tests came back 4 weeks later. This time, the results were clear. Emily sat alone in her apartment holding the paper. Her mother had offered to be there. Jonathan had offered to fly back. She said no to all of them. This was her truth. She needed to face it alone. She unfolded the paper. She read the name. The father was Jonathan Pierce. Andrew Miller was not her biological father. The man whose family had been destroyed. He had carried that weight for nothing. The affair had happened. The guilt was real. But Emily was not his daughter. And somehow, that made everything more complicated. In the end, Emily did something no one expected. She called Andrew Miller, not to blame him, just to talk. You thought I was yours for 20 years, she said. You carried that secret. And when the truth came out, it destroyed your family. Andrew was silent. I'm sorry, not because of what happened, but because you never got to know me. Maybe that's the real loss. Andrew's voice cracked. I thought about you every year on your birthday, whether you were happy. I was, Emily said. My mom made sure of that. Laura never fully recovered from the truth. Emily forgave her, slowly, painfully, but completely. But Laura never forgave herself. She had lied to protect everyone, and the lie had hurt everyone. The truth doesn't always heal, but it always finds its way to the surface. Emily met Jonathan in Chicago 6 months later. They had dinner at a small Italian restaurant. He brought photos of his children. Emily's half-siblings she had never known existed. When the check came, Jonathan took her hand. I know I missed everything, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Emily squeezed his hand. That's all I ever wanted to hear. The envelope is gone now. Laura threw it away months ago, but the weight of it will never leave her. Some truths are too heavy to carry, and some secrets are too dangerous to keep. But in the end, the only thing that matters is what you do after the envelope is opened. For decades, Maury Povich stood at the center of family truth and DNA revelations. Calm voice, one envelope, a sentence that could change lives forever. But this story never needed a stage. It only needed the courage to ask the question and the strength to live with the answer.